Chapter 18. By the time I went to work Monday morning, I felt like I might actually get packed on time. We had almost everything in my place in boxes. The only things not ready to go were the things we would need to get through the week, until Saturday when Rain, Cameron, and my brother-in-law, Tracy, were going to help us. Just before quitting time, I got a message from Devon. "Come by the new place before you go to the apartment." It read. I frowned at my PCD and wondered what was up. After work, I started the car and turned the other direction as I left the parking lot, heading for the new house. A few minutes later, I pulled into the driveway, parked, and went to the door, still wondering why he was here instead of at his place, packing. I stepped inside and stood in the open doorway, my mouth open in shock. Devon had somehow managed to move everything out of my apartment while I was at work. My eyes adjusted to the dim room, and I spotted Dev lounging on the sofa watching me. "How?" He grinned. "I asked some of the team for help. I convinced them it would be a good workout. I didn't tell them it would be a chance for me to get to know them better too." I stepped out of the doorway and pushed it shut, hanging my purse on the inside doorknob. "I can't believe you emptied my apartment and got it all unloaded here while I was at work." "Not just yours, mine's empty too." I blinked, stunned. "All we have to do is clean them and we can turn the keys back." He looked pleased that he'd surprised me. I didn't know what to say. "What about my brothers?" He smirked. "They were never planning to help. We just told you that. I told them I had friends who would help, and we were going to do it while you were at work. Instead, Brittany, your mom and mine will be here at 8 o'clock Saturday morning to help you unpack." "You asked your mom to come help me unpack?" I was touched. She would have been upset if I hadn't. She's so glad to have a daughter in town again. She already thinks of you that way, even though we're not married yet. Because we're mated, and mated is more than married, I get it. He nodded. Something occurred to me. Your mom knows that Brittany doesn't know, right? About the kitsune? Yeah. She knows, but she knows your mom and sister are human, so she wouldn't have said anything. I took a deep breath and let it out in a rush, letting my body fall onto the couch beside him. I'm glad it's all moved, but man, I don't want to dig through all this to find something to eat. I kicked my shoes off and stretched my stocking feet in front of me, wiggling and stretching out the cramps from being in the heels all day. No need. Dinner's in the oven and I have paper plates. I've already found and put away the flatware, so we don't have to fight with plastic. You are a god. I spun in my seat and laid down, putting my head in his lap and throwing my feet over the arm of the couch. Looking up at his face, I grinned. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" He looked down at me, a soft look in his eye. "Not yet, but the day's not over." I rubbed my face back and forth against the t-shirt covering his stomach, taking in his scent and letting it relax me. "I might even show you later." I felt his fingers comb through my hair and closed my eyes, enjoying the sensation. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, something was beeping and Devon was calling my name. I stirred. "Nicki, I need to get up." I lifted my head, letting him slide out from under me before letting my head drop to rest on the cushion. Blinking several times, I remembered where we were. That I no longer had to dread moving boxes and furniture down all those stairs. I just had to unpack. I sat up, swinging my legs to the front of the sofa, and waited for my sleep-fogged brain to clear enough to go into the kitchen. I finally realized that the beeping was a timer, and it meant dinner was ready. Before I could make my body behave enough to get up, Devon came back and handed me a plate of lasagna. I took it and looked down at it for a second. "You didn't have to wait on me." I was headed to the kitchen. "We can eat at the table." "No, we can't, it's covered." He sat beside me and started eating. "I guess I'm off the hook then." I took a bite, and the recognition was instant. "This is Mom's lasagna." Yep. When I asked for the day off to get everything moved before you got home, she said she would cook for us. She insisted you would be too tired to cook, but you still needed good food, not crappy takeout. She brought it over and put it in the oven just before you got home. I'll have to tell her how much I appreciate it, I said between bites. This is good and I'm glad she did it. I didn't want to cook. I scraped the last bits of sauce and cheese from my plate, licked my fork clean and set them on the table in front of the sofa. I don't even want to think about what it's gonna take to get the bed ready for sleeping. Don't. It would be a waste of energy, the bed's made. He slid his own empty plate onto the coffee table, leaned back and patted his leg, inviting me to lie back down. I couldn't resist and I laid down again, head in Devon's lap. How was your day? He asked. I sighed and rubbed my cheek against his jeans. The stiff cloth didn't feel as good against my skin as the worn cotton of his t-shirt, but it held his scent, and that was what I needed anyway. Long. I was quiet for a moment, then continued. In some ways I'll miss the job and the people, but in a lot of ways I won't. Oh. Problems? Nothing major and nothing out of the ordinary, just petty crap that gets on my nerves. Office politics. He rubbed one hand up and down my arm. The touch of his skin soothing me, helping me to relax. Anything new on Brandon? I asked. Not yet. His voice was steady and composed. I don't really expect to hear much for a few days. What about Annie? Anything new there? No, I haven't heard from Rain or Ethan yet. I'll let you know when I do, if you're not here. Okay. What do you want to do tonight? He asked. Nothing. I didn't want to move. I would say find a film, but we don't have a screen set up. I looked out the window across from where the sofa sat. In that moment, I didn't look forward to having to unpack and get everything set up. How about you go change clothes, get comfortable, and I'll see what I can come up with. There was something he wasn't saying. I could hear it in his voice, but I couldn't tell what it was, and I was too tired to try to figure it out. I pushed myself up and headed for the bedroom. Are you coming? He got up and followed, and I noticed a slight limp as he walked. Is your leg bothering you? I was surprised. The leg he'd shattered hadn't bothered him much in the last few weeks. Yeah, it's a little sore tonight. I knew the pain had to be horrible for him to admit it. Come on. Let's see what we can do about that. I took his hand and pulled him into the bedroom. Stepping into the bedroom, I found what he'd been up to. The bed was all set up and made, just as I had left it this morning at the apartment, and although there were boxes stacked along one wall, he had set up the screen from his apartment high on the wall at the foot of the bed. It was all ready for us to lie on the bed and watch something. I ignored it. Instead, I turned to face Dev. A bath first. The tub is big enough for both of us, and I think a hot bath will feel great to both of us. I tugged his shirt up. He pulled the worn material off over his head. Not too hot, he reminded me that I wasn't supposed to raise my body temperature over a certain point. I didn't argue. I just started peeling out of my own clothes. We soaked in the warm water until I was sure the muscles in his sore leg would be loose, or not as tight as they had been. I put on a robe, had him stretch out face down on the bed, and I pulled a bottle of lotion out of my overnight bag. I had no clue where the baby oil I usually used was when I rubbed him down, and I wasn't hunting for it now. I started with his left leg and worked my way up, massaging the stiff and sore muscles of his calf before moving to his thigh, then started over with his right leg. The right leg was a lot worse. I had known it would be. I felt the stiffness of his muscles, protesting having been overworked. You worked just as hard as any of the other guys today, didn't you? I already knew the answer. Probably harder, just to prove you are capable of leading them, didn't you? He didn't answer but winced and made a pained noise when I hit a particularly stiff knot in his thigh. After I'd massaged both legs as long as he could stand, I started working my way upward, over his ass and up his back. I enjoyed the soft sounds of pleasure he made as I worked the less intense kinks out of his back. I knelt astride his butt while I worked his upper back, shoulders, and neck. When I was done, I rose onto my knees and tugged on one shoulder. Roll over. He twisted and moved until he was laying on his back, looking up at me, his clear gray eyes soft with desire. He ran his hands up my thighs, pushing my robe up as he slid his hands over my bare skin. He let his hands rest on my waist for a moment, and then slid them forward to rest on my flat stomach. I watched the cascade of emotions wash over his face. He moved his hands up my body, pushing the tie on my robe apart. The sides fell open to expose a line of skin all the way up to my face. He pulled my robe farther apart, until the sides rested on the outside of my body, framing my breasts instead of hiding them. "You're so beautiful." His voice was soft as he looked up at me. I couldn't move. I knelt there and looked down at him, gazing up at me. He slid his hands up my sides, just under my arms. His grip tightened as he pulled me down against him, stopping only when he could reach my mouth with his. I braced my arms against the bed and let him kiss me. His lips played gently over mine as he explored my mouth with soft, careful movements. My arm slid away. As he lowered me that last little bit until my chest lay against his, I sank into the kiss, letting out hushed sounds of happiness. I broke the kiss and ran my mouth along his jaw, down the side of his neck and over his chest, leaving a trail of gentle bites and soft kisses in my wake. His body tightened, his hips rolling and muscles twitching as he tried to lie still and let me play with him. A soft growl, unlike any human sound, rumbled through his chest and escaped his lips. I kept teasing him, my tongue circling his flat nipples, moving back and forth between them for several minutes. I continued on my trail down his body to dip my tongue in his belly button and nip the edges of his skin with my teeth. I shrugged out of the robe, dropping it to one side of the bed. Devon growled again, louder this time, as he wrapped his hands around my arms, pulling me up his body. He pulled me into a kiss and, without warning, he rolled, taking me with him until he knelt over me and I lay staring up at him. He grinned. "My turn." His voice had gone deep and rough. I couldn't help but smile back. "Your turn." My own voice was breathy in a way I hadn't expected. Dev took advantage of my compliance to run his mouth over my body, much as I had done to his. He used his hands, teasing the parts of me he knew would set me aflame. In what seemed like seconds, but I knew had to be longer, he had me desperate and begging. "Please," I gasped. "Please what?" "Please," I was barely able to think. "Tell me what you want." "You." I had a hard time putting words together. "Now." "You have me. Right here, right now." I groaned, realizing he was teasing me and going to continue the torment until I could tell him exactly what I wanted. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, struggling to push back the overwhelming sensations filling my mind and body enough to think. I spoke carefully. It was the only way I was going to be able to say it. "I want you. Inside me. Hard. And fast." I gasped as he lowered his mouth to my breast, taking one nipple in the wet heat and playing with it, but I continued. "I want you to fuck me until I come so hard I scream, and the neighbors wonder if you're killing me." "The neighbors aren't so close anymore." He released my breast to remind me. "I know." I smiled up at him. "You're playing with fire." He gave me an intense look. I wanted to tell him to burn me, but instead of saying anything, I rolled my hips, letting my body rub against his, speak for me. I felt the tip of him, where it lay stiff against his abdomen, and I tried to wiggle down the bed to feel more. Devon grabbed my hands and pinned them over my head, stopping me from moving. "No, you don't. I'm in charge here. You get what I give you." He bent to kiss me and lowered his hips to rest on top of mine, pressing his erection into my stomach. My hips lifted, begging for more as I groaned into his kiss. I couldn't hold my body still. I tugged my arms. He still held them securely over my head. It wasn't that I wanted free, but when your hands are bound, whether by hands or something else, instinct makes you pull at it, test the bonds. Not being able to use my hands made my body more sensitive, more eager got his touch, for his body pressed against mine, inside mine. I couldn't stop myself from squirming under him. Devon slid the hand not holding mine captive down over my body, barely skimming over its surface, teasing me as he slipped between my thighs. He flicked one finger over my clit, making me twitch and groan before moving lower. His finger slid easily through the slick moisture seeping from my core. I felt his finger slip inside me, and I couldn't help the whimper that fell from my lips. He moved the slick digit up and circled the hardened bundle of nerves that sat waiting, and flicked back and forth over it for just a moment. My whole body tensed, my back arched, and a wave of pleasure washed through my body. My body was still tight when Devon moved over me, my hands still pinned over my head. He leaned down to kiss me as he adjusted himself, lining his manhood up with my opening. He captured my mouth with his, taking control of the kiss. He let me feel his complete control with the touch of his lips. I tried to direct the kiss, leading him where I wanted, but Devon would have no part of it. He only gave me what he was willing to give. As the pleasure receded, my body relaxed and my muscles began to loosen. Devon slowly pushed into me, sliding easily through the wet heat waiting for him. In and out, he set a swift, unrelenting pace that quickly pushed me into orgasm again. I pulled at my hands, wanting to run them over his body. He released my hands and I cupped his face. Stretching up to kiss his lips briefly before wrapping my arms around his body, I slid my hands up and down his back, occasionally raking my nails as I went. He bent his head, licking and nipping my neck while baring his own to me. I couldn't resist. I ran my teeth and tongue down his neck, and as the pleasure burst over me, instinct took over and I bit down. I felt him do the same. The stinging pain turned to pleasure and pushed me higher. My body seized and pleasure exploded through my mind. I threw my head back against the bed and screamed until my breath was gone and my body exhausted. The week went by quickly and Friday was my last day at the college. A few of the other secretaries, as well as my replacement, threw me a small going-away party at the end of the day. I thanked them several times and sent what was left of the cake home with them for their families. When it was all over, I took one last look around the office that had been mine for the last 6 years. With a deep breath, I closed the door for the last time and carried the single box filled with my things out to my car. I was setting the box on the bumper to thumb the panel that would unlock the trunk when I realized that with my hands full, I was a prime target. I glanced around, checking to see who was nearby. There wasn't anyone close, but I spotted a familiar face across the parking lot. I didn't know his name, but I'd seen him when Devon had called all the enforcers together a couple of weeks ago. I loaded the box into the car and headed home. I was dispirited about leaving a job and people I liked, but at the same time, somehow excited about what lay in front of me. On the drive to the house that I now shared with Devon, I wondered how long we could afford for me not to work before I needed to start at the antique shop. When I'd told Mr. Willoughby I had a lot going on, I hadn't been lying, just exaggerating how much time I really needed. It would be great to have a chance to unpack and to help Mom, Brittany, and Devon's mom with planning my wedding. I thought about what lay ahead of me with a little bit of trepidation. It was daunting to think about how much unpacking I still had to do. We'd unpacked a few boxes here and there as we'd needed things. Some of the dishes in order to get the towels they'd been packed in, glassware, shower supplies, that kind of thing. I could eat takeout and frozen meals. I don't mean prepackaged crap, but things I'd cooked and frozen off paper plates, but I wanted real glasses to drink out from and towels for after I showered. I had made it a policy to unpack at least one box a day since the day after Devon had surprised me by moving. It had only been a few of days, so I hadn't managed much progress, but I knew I was going to have help tomorrow and we'd get a good chunk of it finished. Pulling into the yard, I thought for the first time about dinner. As soon as I killed the engine, I dropped my head to the steering wheel, thinking I didn't want to have to cook tonight. I was startled upright when the car door beside me suddenly flew open. "Are you all right?" I heard the voice first, registering that it belonged to Gavin Waters, one of the men Devon had been keeping around the house to make sure nothing happened. I nodded, taking a deep breath before answering. I'm fine, Gavin. I was feeling puny and not wanting to cook. I hated admitting it, but I could see the concern etched in his face. The way you collapsed forward like that, I thought you were hurt. I'm sorry. I was having a pity party. I'm just glad you're all right. He held out a hand and helped me out of the car, despite the fact that I didn't need help. Today was your last day, right? Yeah. I went to the back of the car to get my things, but when I opened the trunk, he took the box, not letting me lift or carry it. I can get that, I said. Yeah, but so can I, and it's easier for me. Knowing there was no point in arguing, I shook my head and opened the front door. Where do you want this? He asked. Just add it to that pile over there. I motioned to a heap on one side of the living room. He set the box on top of the stack and turned back to me. Now you didn't want to cook. Would you let me cook for you? You don't have to do that. If nothing else, I have stuff in the freezer. I don't mind, I enjoy cooking. I was surprised. Gavin had spent more than a little time around our house over the last week, and we were slowly getting to know each other, but I hadn't known he liked to cook. If you want to, I won't argue, but I'll come help. I led the way into the kitchen so we could get started.